Learning about aviation can be fun, but oftentimes challenging. One thing that I often find that prevents me from remembering details is which plane they are assigned to, especially when it comes to Japanese, Italian, and Russian aircraft, at least for me. One of the best ways to become more proficient in plane identification is learning how to identify an aircraft quickly based on noticing a set of design choices in any particular model. This may seem like an obvious answer, and it most certainly is, but it is easy to not take note of details and quickly forget what the plane you just looked at looks like. For the more proficient among you, this guide may be a bit boring, but I hope that it might help reinforce some good habits and remind you of some of the features that you may often overlook. This video will be centered around combat aircraft from the Second World War, but the fundamentals can easily be adapted to other eras. I'll start with something simple but very significant: wing shape and placement. All planes have wings, well, most planes, but the way the leading edge, trailing edge, and wingtip are shaped is far from constant. Are the wings elliptical, like this Spitfire? Are they tapered with round tips, like this Hurricane? Are they tapered with a straight leading edge, with the small part near the wing root bent backwards like a P-51D? The other major detail to notice with wings is where they are mounted to the body of the plane. Most common positions for the wing include the following: parasol wings, mounted above the fuselage of the plane, like a PBY Catalina; high or shoulder mounted wings, sitting at or near the top of the fuselage, like this B-24 Liberator or HE-162; mid-mounted wings, placed near the center of the fuselage, like an F-4F Wildcat; low-mounted wings, placed near or at the bottom of the fuselage, like a B-17 or BF-109. Other details, such as how far the wings are from the nose, if they are sloped up or down, dihedral or anhedral, respectively, and how thick they are also useful to take note of. All of these techniques can be used on the tailplane as well, which I'll go over a bit more later. Another big thing to keep an eye out for are engines. How many are there? What type are they? Where are they placed? The first one is pretty easy to identify, but if I had $1 for every time someone said that a B-24 was a B-25, I'd be able to buy a lot more model planes, so don't forget to check this one. The second one is often overlooked by those who don't understand what they're looking at, and this is engine type. There are two distinct engine types for most World War II aircraft, these being water-cooled engines, similar to what you might find in a car, and air-cooled radial engines. At first, this may sound a bit scary, but in almost all cases, identifying the type of the engine is rather simple. For water-cooled engines, the propeller has an aerodynamic spinner, or nose cap, that is flush with the stationary section behind it, such as on the Spitfire and on the Yak-9. Oftentimes, water-cooled engines will have large radiators mounted on the chin, or otherwise on the underside of the aircraft, such as on this Hawker Typhoon and on the P-51. Air-cooled radial engines, on the other hand, often have a small spinner or none at all, with a large rounded opening concentric with the propeller shaft, with a number of cylinder housings exposed radiating outward from the shaft, such as on the P-47 Thunderbolt. The one thing to keep an eye out for are some rather sneaky planes, such as the Junkers Ju-88, which has a round flat front on its engine housings, but the engines are actually water-cooled, and the front is a number of water and oil radiators. Similarly, most versions of the FW-190 are powered by a radial engine, but the large size of the propeller spinner and the presence of a cooling fan make identifying it as a radial engine rather tricky at times. There's also a later model which has a liquid-cooled engine, so just keep your eyes open. If all else fails, water-cooled engines often have a line of exhaust pipes on the side of the engine nacelles, whereas radials often have the exhausts in small clusters around the perimeter. The last detail is a bit easier, as it is much more evident from a quick glance. Be sure to see if the engines are mounted in the fuselage or on the wings, or both, and whether they are mounted centered, on top, or slung underneath the wings. The next area to look at is that of the tailplane. Some aircraft have a conventional tail, others a T-tail, triple tail, or H-tail, which the aforementioned B-24 and B-25 confusion probably stems from. There are some other varieties as well, such as what I'll call linked tails, such as on the P-38 and P-61, which have some variation themselves. This also brings up the point of whether or not the tail is part of the center fuselage or on separate tail booms, or if you want to get really confused on multiple fuselages. Thanks, F-82. Really helping me out today, aren't you? Some other things to note are how a cockpit is built into the rest of the fuselage. Some aircraft have rounded and blended canopies, while others have a stepped windscreen, with a great example of this being the different versions of the HE-111. Some aircraft have very distinct razorbacks rising up to meet the back of the cockpit, whereas others are more integrated, and yet others have a full-on bubble canopy or greenhouse canopy with very little blocking their view. These are exemplified in the Hawker Hurricane, P-40 Warhawk, F-8F Bearcat, and TBF Avenger, respectively. Let's try applying these methods just for example's sake. I'm going to start off with identifying the engine type, which is, let's say, water-cooled. That just about cuts the number of possibilities in half, so that's rather useful. All right, what else can we look for? Wing shape, tapered with round tips, and shoulder-mounted. All right, how many engines? Just one? I can't think of many planes like that off the top of my head. What about the tails? Sort of a T configuration. And finally, canopy, pretty long and stands up from the body, so greenhouse-ish. Well, what do you know? Sounds a lot like a barracuda. There you go. Well, I hope this video helps you with your endeavors to become a better plane spotter. There are definitely other small things that you can get out of a plane, such as is landing gear retractable or not, what size guns, how many turrets does it have, number of blades on the propeller, camouflage schemes. Some of those last ones, though, are hard to identify. Well, aren't always the best because number of propellers, you might not be able to tell if they're spinning. Camouflage scheme can be misleading because many aircraft serve with multiple countries and so on and so forth. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. I hope you enjoyed. And if you have any ideas, any questions, just leave them down in the comments below. And until then, see you next time.